what I want to start is I want to hold space for the ancestors. I want to hold space for Tamir Rice, who would have been 18 years old today. We don't know what Tamir would have been. You know, Tamir might have been the next James Baldwin. He might have been the next physicist who could figure out time travel and get us off this awful timeline. We don't know who Tamir would have been, right? Um, and so, like, we invite Tamir, who is so young, but yet one of my ancestors now into the room. And we are thankful for his witness on this planet. And as the saint, I wanted to talk to you today. It's when they came to me. I'm just going to be very honest. When I got the invitation from my booking agent, they said this Episcopal church is really annoying, and there's some priest, and they just keep emailing you, and they're the worst, and I don't know what to tell them. How do you tell people who really mean well that you're going through too much black trauma to show up at a conference? And it's hard sometimes, uh, and so she forwarded the emails to me because they were persistent. I said, "Oh no, honey, that's the Episcopal Church that's emailing us. That's not a Episcopal Church." And I saw it was an opportunity to spend some time with leaders who are asking the questions that I get, like, "What can I do next?" There's no way you could look at what happened on Lake Street. There's no way. And listen, like a spiritual principle I operate from is like you get to start where you get to start. So are there people in this room who've been fighting for this sort of thing since day one? Yes. Are there people since Trayvon Martin have been on the streets every opportunity they have? Are there people who've been out on the streets since Emmett Till probably in this room? Are there people who yes, of course, I'm not saying that. But there are also people in this room who have never considered the problem of white supremacy in the church, in America, how it affects their ministry, and how it affects the world around them. And George Floyd was their awakening. And so so one principle is everyone gets to start where they get to start, right? Like no one gets to take away your journey from you. One of the things I hate about progressives is that we have a purity test for everything, and I'm over the progressive purity tests. Broad-based coalitions need a little bit more than that. But if you are just awakened in the last couple of weeks, I need to tell you that Brianna's life wasn't worth your awakening. I need to tell you that George's life was not worth your awakening. I need to tell you that all of my people who are suffering in the streets right now, the mothers who are sacrificing their lives, their careers, and their talents, leading the way in the revolution in our community like they always have, because Black mothers have always led the way. None of them are worth your awakening. So I'm grateful you're here. I'm grateful you're asking the questions. What can I do next? But I really think that one of the things we need to speak into spaces like this, particularly in very white church spaces, is that these are real people with real lives who had real families that miss them every day. So if you're tired of talking about it, what do you guys got? Vestries or boards? You guys got something. There's some people in charge of you, right? I know you guys have a little bit more action than us Lutherans. We kind of like let the inmates run the asylum, but yeah, vestry. But in the Lutheran world, the laity run everything, right? You're basically an employee of the church in a lot of ways. So the threats are different for leaders. You guys have a little bit more action, but I also know you're going to pay consequences for this, particularly at the universities and the areas you serve and your context and your peers. So I want to acknowledge that too. I'm just going to do a little bit of reading, and I'm going to talk about 3 things that I think you can do in the next 6 months that'll put you in the position to be a chaplain to the revolution. I believe that the church no longer can assume the role of leader. I believe that when we turned our back, when Dr. King dressed to the nines, played the respectability politics, and did everything he was supposed to do for white America to prove that Black people deserved to be alive, and you decided to assassinate him anyway. I feel like from almost from that point on, the church has lost its response to its right to be leaders. But I do believe we can be chaplains to the revolution. I do believe we can move alongside these movements, and I do believe we have a good word to speak over them. And so I want to talk about the spaces that we can take in solidarity alongside these movements, and a little bit about where it comes from in my book, and then I'll open it up to questions. I know, I mean, raise your hand if you're sick of people talking at you in Zoom rooms. So I definitely want to give some opportunity for us to communicate. Um, but I also know that some of you, this is your first time encountering my work. So I just don't want to take the presupposition that you've read my book or you know what the hell I'm talking about. So dear church, stretching God's tent is frontline freedom fighting. Our role in the revolution was started in a synagogue in Galilee. When Jesus unfurled the text from Isaiah, he read to those gathered, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year of the Lord's favor." Don't you get it that the text is fulfilled in your hearing? You have been given a post armed with grace and armed and armored in love. You are being drafted to wage peace on the world. When someone gives you hell, you are ordered to give them heaven. This is a radical and dangerous act if our places of worship really are the nerve centers for the souls of dozens of families in our communities, and this can be a shock to the system. Waging peace is more dangerous than waging war. Today in your congregation, you have to have tough conversations, not every week, not hiding behind endless debates about strategy statements while the actual work never gets done because of theological navel gazing. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Today, you get to sit down with the member who threatened to leave if you ever became an LGBTQIA affirming space. Tell them that if and when a queer person does gain the courage to darken the doorstep of the church, you are going to roll out the red carpet, period. Add that if they bring children, the kids will be baptized. Tell them Jesus has two moms, Mary and the Spirit Sophia. Tell them that you love and honor their presence at the church and that you treasure them and that they are amazing. Declare that you are going to offer an alternative vision of the kingdom of God despite their ranting and raving. And remind them that they have studied all these texts in the original language and context, and the arc of the gospel narrative is liberation and grace. And then tell them you will write them a loving letter or transfer to wherever congregation they're going to bother next. And remind them that 70% of the Christian world agrees with them, so they should have no trouble finding a new home for their hatred. Do this gently but firmly. Dear church, I have done this in my short time as a pastor. These conversations don't have to be giant blowups and lead only to heartache and pain. They can be moments of transformations. Tell them that you believe Black Lives Matter and that you are committed to the congregation. You are committing the congregation to anti-racism work. Tell them that you are putting in the budget for the next program year mandatory anti-racism training for the church council and anyone who wants to attend. Add that this training is now a requirement for anyone who wants to serve in any leadership position. You'll no longer be reading a reading unless you've gone to the anti-racism training anymore, Betty. Read Act 2 and and have them explain that diversity was the way that the Holy Spirit expressed itself on earth from the birth of the church. Explain to them that the Ethiopian eunuch was baptized before most of the church, even stank-ass Paul. By honoring the struggle of Black peoples, we are keeping the commitment made by the Spirit to Philip 2,000 years ago. Tell them that Ethiopia was worshiping Christ before all of Europe. Tell them that Jesus was lynched by police, and every Good Friday we recount that story, and it touches us somewhere deep inside. The facts that we can't see the parallels of extrajudicial murders of Black people today is a sign that something is wrong with us. It shows that a hard heart and disconnect from the very real event that happened to our Savior. Tell them this, that it's our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support each other, and we have nothing to lose but our chains. Dear church, tell them that Asanta sent you. Tell them that Asada is like John on the island of Patmos, and you can't unsee it. So this idea of how do we create spaces that are more conducive to the revolution, like how do we do that? And as people who get to I don't want to say tinker or experiment. Let's just say get to have holy play with the souls of young adults entering out into the world. I just think it's important stuff. So here's like 3 things I'm just going to give you that are quick that you can do, and then I'll open it up to questions. The first one is you need to start planning ways to talk about Advent now, and you need to invite your entire youth team, including your seniors, into that conversation. And you need to rethink how you're going to talk about Advent. You can have all those conversations from the summer into September. You need to have them figure out how they're going to tell people that blackness is holy, and they need to figure it out. And they need to figure out how come the dawn and white always equals holy and right. And you guys need to figure out new language. And don't ask me what the new language is. I've written it, beloved, and you can either buy it or purchase the book or write it yourself. But wouldn't it be incredible if you sat down with your people and did that? Think about the conversations that would have. I bet you have one person right now you desperately want to send to the church, but hashtag desperately don't want to because you're afraid of the way they're going to be abused, and they are on fire for the gospel, and you're not sure if you should really offer that to them yet or not. Watch their heart light up when you have this conversation. Watch the other kids who aren't sure about this racial justice stuff but can see the importance of it. What's going to happen when you guys decide that you're going to put out an all person of color like a nativity this year, and you're going to explain why? When you explain why it's wrapped in barbed wire or why it's on a plantation, right? So, like, I don't know what those discussions are going to look like. I don't know what that's going to look like in your context. I don't know what you're going to have to do to get away from isn't it like, don't you guys get struck by lightning if you don't read from the book of prayer or something? It's weird, right? There's like a whole thing with you. Yeah, but I'm like, I don't know what that means in your context, but I can tell you that liturgy is a police thing in the Lutheran church too. And the only death threats I've ever received from Lutherans was when I suggested changing the liturgy in this way, where they hunted down my address and threatened my family. Right. So this is, if you think it sounds silly and stupid and weird and just the thing that the white church always does, but I'm telling you, it's contested space in the church, and messing with those fundamental forming things with the folks that you serve is going to have an impact in churches you're never going to see. You know, the second thing is I'm going to suggest for you to do is that you do white homework. And so does your entire leadership team. You can find it on toryglass.com. If you're on Twitter, you may know Tory. Why is white homework the anti-racism thing I suggest, right? I think the church does a terrible job at this. Here's what we do. This is the church's solution to racism. We'll find 1 or 2 talented people of color and convince them that we're not going to harm them. We'll suck them into the heart of our church, and then we're going to run them ragged. And every time something racist happens in America, we're going to have them show up to something. We're going to try not to pay them. And then when they quit in 10 years, we're going to say, why are we so white? Over and over again. We're going to have another blue ribbon commission on diversity, and we're just going to repeat it as we churn leaders out. What makes white homework so well is that it makes you study what happens in your own context. Each lesson is about your town. And so if you have students from diverse areas, guess what they get to research? Their hometown, their history of white supremacy. What happened to the indigenous people that owned their land? Lesson 1. How did the prison industrial complex start in their town? Lesson 2. What has real estate and capitalism affected people of color in the area? Lesson 3. And it runs them through it. And it takes the people who are saying, I don't believe you, and you're a liar, and you're wrong. And all that white homework does is says, that's fine. Look up the facts for yourself, for your area, along this framework of questions, and just report back to us the results. It's ingenious because it has people reveal to themselves their own history of white supremacy where they are. And if you're a person of color, I know that like the last thing, I know as a black person, the last thing I ever want to do is sit through another goddamn racial justice training for as long as I live, so help me God. But I found it really helpful for me too as a black person and someone who lives an anti-racist lifestyle. It's just an incredible. So it's one of the first things I recommend. For every person you have sign up for it, you just give $5 to her Patreon as you go through it. So it's an easy deal to do. It's easy to scale. If you have 5 kids, then it's only going to be $25 a month for you to guys go through this together. If you have 50 kids, it's not going to be that much. So it's easy to scale up. It supports the Black woman who's actually doing the real work. And all the funds that she makes that are for profit this year, she's already fully funded the lifestyle of one Black family in Portland, and she's trying to pay for 2 Black families in Portland. What I mean by that, pay their mortgage, pay their bills, and for the first time in their lives, they won't have to worry about anything. Could you imagine 2 or 3 families on one block in a Black neighborhood actually being able to think 3 steps past Maslow's hierarchy? I mean, the effects that has on the community. So that's the last thing. I mean, the second thing. The last thing I'm going to suggest is that you start a Jubilee fund. And and as I say this, I'm gonna flip through everyone's screen so I can see the evil stink eyes you give me. You know that thing you really want to do? You know that trip that your seniors look forward to? You know that event? You know that thing? You know the thing. It's the thing. It's a big part of your ministry, and it's almost a sacred cow. I'm going to suggest that this year that you dedicate that entire part of the budget to creating a Jubilee fund. And that Jubilee fund is specifically for Black peoples in your community to be decided by your leadership team, whether that be a bail fund, whether that be supporting the local Black student union on every protest that they have, right? Whether that be funding the starting of a Black student union where you are, depending on your context, right? Whether that be paying the rent for a Black family for the entire semester. Whatever that is, you take that money and you show them that it's important that we invest in these communities. We wouldn't need police if there was mental health. We wouldn't need police if there was actually good housing. We wouldn't need police if there was good food in my neighborhood. The problem is that America has abandoned communities of color, and they've asked police to do everything that white people are too lazy to examine for themselves. You don't care about mental health in your country, so you send someone with a gun to my neighborhood to do it for you. Because if you cared, they wouldn't be there. And that's just the truth. You can go, same thing with nutrition in my neighborhood. It's all that kind of stuff, right? So we invest in these communities as church. We pay our tithe. We give back, and we show that it's important. And we make it a big part of our program year. This is the thing we're doing this year, guys. We're raising funds so we can do Jubilee for someone. That's not just because my church plant is named Jubilee Collective, but we are the only queer affirming church plant named after a verse in Leviticus. So, but do you know what I mean? But start a Jubilee fund, make that a serious part of what you do and how you walk. The reason I tell you these 3 things, what would they do for you? The first thing is that you are showing through your sacred work that you are in solidarity with Black lives and Black and brown bodies everywhere, particularly around Advent. Christmas time's a weird time for kids anyway at school, and it's a good time to maybe tear down some of those ideas. We know that they're going back to homes that they don't like, sometimes to parents they don't like, who don't affirm their identities. There's all kinds of stuff going on. So what a perfect time to deconstruct a lot of that bullshit anyway. But it shows that the heart of Christ is with them. We often forget that we are the visible sign of the heart of Christ. We are the closest most people get. And I know that's hard for you to remember right now, beloved, as you sit in your house full of quarantine, overworked and underpaid and super pissed off and stuck in a 3-day Zoom conference because basically the church makes you. But it's the truth. You're the closest someone's going to get to experiencing Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and that has powerful resonations in the world, particularly around high holy holidays. So those sacred vibrations, I think, are important to praying over the movement. The white homework piece is so you educate yourself on what your context where you serve is like, and maybe your hometown, to maybe frame some of your own narrative. If you don't know your white story, there's no way you're going to understand my Black story. if you don't know the history of whiteness. So study your hometown and where you serve. And then get the kids that are there with you to do that for the college, so they're empowered to maybe do stuff there and practice what they're going to do in the world and their hometown. So when they go home, they're empowered and they know their own history of whiteness. And the last part of Jubilee Fund is just so you can demonstrate to them what collective organizing can do and how powerful it can be. That's it. And it's laying that stuff out within the narrative of salvation history in a God who steps into time and space for the express purpose of liberation for oppressed peoples over and over again in all the ancient documents we have recounting this God. And so how do we demonstrate that in quantifiable ways that these folks will take out into the world and then do in their homes? And that's a whole semester's worth of stuff you can do just with those three things. So I hope you guys found that helpful.
Thank you, Lenny. So I'd love to, like Lenny was saying, we've had a lot of people talking at us, give the opportunity to ask some questions, places of residence, comments. So please type it up in the Zoom or unmute yourself and ask away.
It's all clergy here too, right? Or mostly clergy or clergy workers? Are there students here too?
There's
I'm just trying to figure out if I can smoke a cigarette. It's all right. Go ahead.
The answer is yes, you can. I have a question. Like many Episcopal college ministries and Episcopal churches, I only have a couple of Black members. And one of them is from South Africa, so a different experience. How do I have these conversations without putting so much weight on them? How do I make it so that it doesn't feel like she is the object of attention? How do I include her in ways that doesn't put that pressure on her? And then how do we have that conversation it's not just a bunch of white feelings on display?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. The particularly Black women, but your Black students that are coming back, man, they're having to be ambassadors for their entire race all the time right now. It's pretty hard. I would say the first thing is like you need to let all Black people opt out of any of your racial justice work and or training that they want to do. Almost like that's got to be standard policy for you. Like the same way that like it's standard policy for some of us now to do pronouns, and you're seeing that more and more in these spaces, right? Right. We did that because like trans people mattered. And so if we just did it with our cis privilege, it'd be super easy for other people. It's almost the same thing, right? Like, you know, you're the leader in the position to be like, hey, for one thing, any person of color, a Black person, does not have to do anti-racism training. Their anti-racism training is that they survived and they got their ass to college. Like, that's it. Like, for right now, that's all they need. But you also, as a white leader, want to be sensitive to, what if I have a revolutionary or a prophet being born in my ministry? Someone who can speak uniquely to the times. How do I cultivate that without a sense of predatory need for my ministry, right? Because we get covetty. We get covetty with the people that we raise, right? That we help raise. Right? How do I do that without a sense of the Episcopal Church, which is probably just like the ELCA, of coming in and being like, oh, this person has to be a priest. They're going to speak about all the things, and they like put them on all the covers and all the magazines, and then we watch them get burned out in 5 years. We don't know where they are. Like all these. The first thing is you have to find other people who can speak to that person's experience. You got to find mentors for them, and you got to realize it ain't you. You know what I mean? As a cis white dude, it just ain't you, right? And like that's okay. I think part of what movement work can speak over the church is that it will remind us that we are the body of the body of Christ. because movement work reminds us that no one person is bigger than the movement. Like, I know that I'm just a writer, a witness, and an agitator. I'm not an organizer. Do you know how I know that? I met organizers. They're really good at what they do. And I was like, holy shit, I'm not good at organizing protests, but these people are, right? So how can I support them? So I started to define my role. So defining your role in this too, right? So what's your role? Are you showing up as a student to learn about your whiteness? Are you inviting other white students to learn about their whiteness? Well, that conversation automatically sort of excludes that student, but also is a signal to your black students, holy shit, these people care about me. Because those 30 or 50 microaggressions I deal with a month just to hang out in this ministry, they're finally going to start addressing those. See, the black people that you have in your ministry have already experienced racism in your ministry, whether you believe it or not. They've experienced microaggressions and they've experienced whiteness in a way that's been harmful to them. But something about your ministry and something about their faith in Christ keeps them coming back. I can tell you that's my experience as a black person in a mainline denomination. You know, and I come back and so I know what I'm in for too, and it means I'm kind of bought in. So I would suggest hooking this person up with mentors, making sure you're not being exploitive, coming to the conversation as a student if you are a student, and if you are a teacher, like taking the role as a white person who's a teacher and teaching like other white people, and figuring out what is your work and what isn't your work. You know, but I think if you come with that spirit and then you create mentors and spaces, and then once you guys have done your work as white folks, you're willing to follow those black folks' lead. Because at the end of any good anti-racism work, you're going to realize, holy shit, I'm compromised, and maybe I should just follow black folks' lead. Right? And so these sort of things will kind of like naturally occur within the community too, I think, if you go into the process pretty sincerely. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Thanks, Lenny. That's perfect. That's very helpful.
There's a question from someone from Richmond, Virginia, who's a clergy, intersection of campus ministry, community outreach, and pastoral care, and legitimately has students who are on the front lines being arrested and charged on felony assault, bailing out. I have folks who are hungry, homeless, and struggling to literally stay alive. And I have folks who care more about their history and are feeling grief and attacked. I'm doing my homework, but I'm damn tired of caring for people who don't care for others. What am I supposed to do when I'm exhausted?
No, those are all great questions, and thank you so much. That was from Kim, right? I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to say the name. I'm sorry. It was in the chat for everyone. Sorry.
Totally fine.
I think the first thing is that we need to talk about the seriousness of your question. Every frontline freedom fighter that I knew that received pastoral care from a pastor who was on the ground in Ferguson died by suicide, supposedly, over the last 5 years. Now, look, you can chalk that up to just the work, and there has been plenty written about the work of going out and doing frontline freedom fighting. Most of these kids don't have long to live if they're engaged in the work for longer than 2 years. I mean, those are just the numbers. They either commit suicide, substance abuse goes up. I don't want to freak anyone out. I'm a believer in COINTELPRO. A lot of these deaths are very mysterious. You can do the research on your own. You don't have to believe me. But there was a group of people who wanted to provide pastoral care to folks on in Ferguson in the right around month 3, month 4, almost like kind of where we are with COVID. They realized that people were falling apart, and so they created a rotating staff of some Episcopal clergy. I think Mike was involved, Mike Kinnan from there. Some other folks were involved, Tracy Blackmon, you know, but mostly a lot of the seminarians and a lot of the folks from the local, like Eden and some other places that, you know, had just been there and just wanted to provide care. It was very difficult. The federal government had already infiltrated the movement pretty hard. They were very untrustworthy of anyone who had not been there since the very beginning. Most of the pastors who had been there from the very beginning were in need of care themselves and were of no use to anyone by that point. And so this is a very serious thing. If you do have kids who are on the front line, and if they are getting committed, you need to realize that they're at high risk of death, either by suicide or by cop or just by the situation. And so that needs to be a focus. And we've discovered this over and over again as pastor who served in these intersections. And they're usually good kids who get involved in the movement. Most of them are like college bound or pretty entrepreneurial, pretty bright futures ahead of them. And this is typically the type who gets kind of, something bad happens to, and then they get pulled into the movement, and then something happens. And it's, part of it's the existential crisis of trying to fight for your life every day and no one believing that's real. Part of it's the body count. Part of it's just the constant work of community building. So the way that we build community slowly over time, you got to remember movements are building the same amount of community that you built in your ministry, but they have 3 or 4 days to do it. And they got to try and take care of many people as they can. And then once that first week or two and there's momentum, then they only have like a month more to build out. And typically whatever's there is there. You know what I mean? And whoever the players are the players. No one else is going to come in from the outside. And anyway, so that's the first thing. Please pay attention to those kids. I know you are, but yeah, and there are lots of resources. One good book is Ferguson and Faith that you can pick up, and it's all the stories of all the pastors who were on the front lines from the first email that Tracy sent. So I think Tracy Blackmon, the Reverend Tracy Blackmon, sent the first email that there's a dead young man outside of my church. And that started the series of emails. And so this book kind of traces what happened. So it's a good deal. The ones that are being arrested in charge of felony assault, listen, my experience with the criminal justice system, I got felony assault on the cop because I spit on his shoe. I mean, I got felony assault one time because they cuffed me and he was talking shit to me and I yanked myself. And so that was assault. That'll probably get dropped in court, to be real honest with you, but that also means they'll have a misdemeanor and something on their jacket. This is how they, yeah, exactly. It's bull. And, and then the last thing I'll say, which is the hardest thing that in your question, I think there's going to be a time as leaders where we're going to have to ask ourselves a question, whether or not we are going to coddle unrepentant racists in our in our ministries. And for some people, that's scary, right? I'm a big believer in God's grace. I mean, the only reason the Episcopal Church didn't get me is because of the Lutheran grace thing. But I did make my bishop at my ordination write down the name of the 3 Episcopal bishops who were present at his consecration, because that shit matters to me. I'm like one of the only Lutherans I know who cares about that. But what my point is that you're going to have to make a choice in your ministry of whether or not you're going to coddle white supremacy. And if you don't call your people to confession, then they are unrepentant racists. If it's your job to call people to repentance and you have not done that, then you're creating unrepentant racism. And that's hard, right? And so you're gonna have to make some choices. I got to tell you, I have little. I'd rather be fired and on my ass and on the street with nothing but Jesus Christ than to pretend anymore that I have time for like white nonsense. And that's what a lot of that stuff is, because most people aren't actively racist. And if you present them with the real facts and you show them the deal, they will be shocked to action. Yeah, we can't let an extreme 10% in our country make us believe that over half of us are broken and don't care. Most people just don't know. And when they're shown, they wake up to some sort of action. So that's what I would say to that question. Anyone else got any really hard questions where I can talk about how you could lose your job? Because that'd be cool. I mean, and for Episcopal people, that's tough, right? Like that's the only thing that survives the nuclear Armageddon is like what, cockroaches in your pension fund? Those are like the two things, right?
I have a
Like, I
question.
get it. Yes, please.
I'm sorry. Hi, Lenny. So I'm at the University of Chicago. I got to work with uh, someone who has spoken glowingly of you, Kwame Pitts, for a couple years while she was here, and my colleague. So I work at a place that is very, very heady, but has the possibility of forming people who potentially could be doing the deep systemic work, sociology, economics, okay, Chicago school, but anthropology, social work, all of those things that could do that deeper, long-term work to get at the systemic stuff that's in deep, deep, deep. And what I hear my students struggle with is, how do you balance the really urgent work of now, right? The people who are dying now, and the work that they can be doing that potentially will prevent deaths in the future from what's in the system. And I don't know how to talk to them about that balancing act.
Yeah, no problem. You're at Augustana? You're across the street from the seminary?
Kwame was at Augustana. I'm at Brent House, which is just down the street.
Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah, I know that place. All right, just wanted to check. I know the area. Yeah, great question, right? One of the things that white supremacy is so good at doing, it convinces us a couple things. One of the things is like perfection, the obsession with perfection, right? Like somehow me fucking up publicly is worse than the pain that black people go through every day, right? Like I might say the wrong thing. I might not write the right liturgy. I might not show up at the protest. So perfectionism is one thing. Another thing is that white supremacy always tries to convince us that we're the hero of the story, and we're not. Most of the time, we're like a bit character at best, right? Like at the Festival of Homiletics, I'm very happy that forever and ever my title will be opening act for Reverend Barber, right? I'm a bit actor. I'm like the warm-up act for like the real deal, and I'm comfortable with that. Like knowing where you fit in the revolution is very important, right? And so like you have to figure out where you're going to make your stand, and you have to stick to that principle. And if their principle is they're going to improve systemic conditions, and that means that they're not going to be able to be on the streets every day, they got to figure that out. And they have to know that what they're doing is part of frontline freedom fighting too, which is why I say the same thing about our churches. You are affecting the hearts, the minds, and the souls of hundreds of thousands of people in the course of your ministry, which then affects that many households, which then affects that many communities. The work that we do is very transformative and very powerful. It's just that we don't see it because it comes in driplets and usually with a snarky email from someone who's in charge of us, right? But it's really powerful stuff. White supremacy convinces you that you have to do all the things all the time, and that's the only way you can handle it. When the truth is that you could just love people where you are. You could just create anti-racist space in your, like literally my backyard, my home. And that can expand to the next household and that sort of a thing. So part of movement work is, or part of revolutionary work is figuring out what your work is and doing that work and getting the hell out of the way of the people who are doing the other work. It's staying in your own lane. And so part of why I call the church to this work of chaplain to the revolution, because it's us staying in the lane. We're staying out of the way of the organizers. We're staying out of the way of the sociologists. We're staying out of the way of the economists. We're staying out of the way of those who are going to join the Justice Department and I guess try and change that piece of garbage from within, right? But in your case, you actually are the chaplain or the pastor to those folks, right? And so your role in the revolution is to make sure that they have a solid theological grounding to go out into the world and declare that Jesus says Black Lives Matter. And knowing that work is just as important as throwing tear gas back at a cop, and that they're not cowards for that. That in fact, that the braver thing to do sometime is yes, theology matters, exactly. That the braver thing to do is to actually do the thing that everyone may not see, right? Like I have multiple felonies. I cannot be arrested every protest anymore. If I'm arrested at a couple more protests, I'll probably go away for 10 years, if not longer, depending on what state I'm arrested in. I have, you know what I mean? Like, I can't do that anymore. And like, it's been hard for me because I haven't been able to be out in the streets in the ways that I've wanted to. And then when I go out in the streets, because I do have a bit of a platform, I can't post about it, talk about it, or meet anyone because I'm usually a damn distraction. So it's been hard to find my place. But my daughter actually saved my life. And what she said to me is that she said, you've been putting in the work for 5 years every time you've had the microphone at any church event, at any speaking event, and any time you've written anything, and almost every sermon you've ever preached. This has been the center of what you've talked about. And that she felt, which is delightful to hear from your 21-year-old, that she felt that I was too important to Black theology to risk my life. And so, you know, you have to weigh your, yeah, I was still out there. I still did things, right? But you have to find your spaces. And I think you have to encourage your people to do that too. This isn't going away. This is going to be the central issue for the next 50 years in the United States of America. This is it. This is, yeah, exactly. And it's about helping them discern their place in the revolution, for sure.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, it's time, and we're not at a conference, you know, in person where it can just sort of creep out. We're going to get pulled back in about 30 seconds. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's it for me. I'm super. You can find me on anything. And anyone who knows me, I think Ben Adams is somewhere on page 4. If you just hit me up on any social media, I'll hit you back. I'm super accessible. I love helping my peers. God bless.
Thank you, Lenny.
Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Love you, Lenny.
Thanks, Lenny.